objects. Our philosophy is based on sound science and free from the outdated dogmas of the 20th century.
Hi, this is Rick Maltese.
This is Jon Entine.
And this is the Eco-Modernist Podcast. Our podcast today will focus on a new and controversial documentary that has recently opened in theaters around the country, Food Evolution. Narrated by renowned astrophysicist and science communicator Neil deGrasse Tyson, this documentary premieres amidst a brutally polarized debate over genetic engineering and the future of food and farming. The movie tells the story of an intense debate, and much like the political divide in our country, it is riven by fear, distrust, and confusion. There are more or less two camps when it comes to so-called GMOs. One that believes modern biotechnology is safe. The other is deeply suspicious of the potential misuse of technology. It's that debate and that deep divide that we will be talking about. But first, I'd like to introduce our co-host for today. Jon Entine is a veteran TV and print journalist with more than 40 years of experience and winner of 20 major journalism awards. He has written 4 books on genetics and agricultural issues. He's also the founder and executive director of the Genetic Literacy Project, a web-based biotechnology and genetics outreach organization. Welcome to our program, Jon.
Thank you, Rick. Scott Hamilton Kennedy is the director, producer, and writer of Food Evolution. He's worked in the film and television industry with such legends as Roger Corman, and he's made music videos with the likes of Jimmy Cliff. He's an Academy Award nominee. Joining Scott are 2 of the world's top scientists working in the biotechnology field. Alison van Eenennaam, whose day job is as an animal geneticist at the University of California, Davis, was one of the stars in the documentary. Also joining us is Kevin Folta. Kevin is chairman of the horticultural department at the University of Florida, and he's regarded as one of the top food and farming science communicators in the world. And he has a great podcast of his own, Talking Biotech. Scott, you've been quoted as saying that Food Evolution turned out to be a different film than the one you first started researching. What was the original premise of the film? And to those unfamiliar with the documentary, what's its central narrative?
Thanks for having us. Good to be here. The film started with a much broader scope in that the people that approached us to make the film, IFT, the Institute of Food Technologists, approached several documentarians, dare I say it, at my stature. They were looking for documentarians that made theatrically released films and had awards potential. The subject matter they were talking about was the 9 billion 2050 conundrum, that we are quickly moving from 7.2 billion people on the planet to 9 billion by 2050. How are we going to feed all those people safely and sustainably? As many of your listeners probably know, we might need to create more food in the next 34 years than in the last 10,000. And that was too broad of a subject for a documentary. So I went away with my writing and producing partner, Trace Sheehan, and looked for some other subjects under that umbrella. And we found that the GMO story was just waving its hands as a controversial subject matter, an important subject matter, a subject matter that was about food and science, and one that was not being told correctly, to the point where I was almost shocked as a documentarian that this amazing subject hadn't been scooped up by somebody else. So that's how we came to find the story. And then the overview of what Food Evolution is now is a resetting of the conversation around GMOs, that a lot of people have been given misinformation on GMOs, that they're unsafe and don't even know what they are and cause all sorts of ills. And they think that it's sort of owned by one company, Monsanto usually. And we wanted to reset that conversation. But most importantly, it's a film that is in defense of science more than it's in defense of GMOs. The GMO story is really a metaphor for defending science and how we make decisions about how we eat, how we decide on issues as big as climate change and everything else.
I think as an agricultural scientist, it's been very frustrating to see the Hollywood interpretation of agriculture. The movies that you alluded to were very lopsided and inaccurate portrayals of where the science is on agriculture. They were more political commentaries than they were documentaries, I guess. And that's really been the history, and that there really hasn't been a compelling narrative documentary made. that puts out the science in an interesting and narrative storytelling way to where hopefully we can entice audiences that maybe don't know much about this subject to come in and expose themselves to what the actual information is. In this age of alternative facts, I think really it came along at a time in history where there's a lot of issues that have similar incorrect information getting bandied about. To me, the different thing about food evolution is it really is very true to what the science consensus is around this particular topic.
Yeah, and along a similar line, what you're seeing with documentaries and these types of films, really just a microcosm of the bigger problem, that there's been a lack of participation and communication of the people who really understand the science and are qualified to communicate it. And farmers, scientists, we've stepped away from the public front in these discussions. The reason why is pretty apparent when you've seen the reaction to the documentary. You present people with facts that are not consistent with their beliefs, and there's very strong pushback. And I think that this kind of documentary is necessary. I think it was a wonderful step forward, and I think maybe a real turning point in the discussion.
What's been the reaction to food evolution? I saw on Rotten Tomatoes that the movie's gotten a 100% rating from critics. That's pretty extraordinary. I've never seen that before.
The 100% on Rotten Tomatoes is a wonderful honor, and the response from the critics is amazing. I will absolutely say that those things can change very quickly, so I will not be tooting that horn too loudly yet. And it's wonderful that they're getting it. One of the nice feelings of having an audience respond to the film was that what you found to be interesting and fascinating and funny and moving, other people did too. So it's always an honor as a storyteller to have people get the film. And the critics are not shying away from checking their own biases. I mean, the film is really a lot about confirmation bias, and that a lot of the critics are acknowledging that their bias coming into the film was anti-GMO, and that they took this journey and came out, it's overly simplistic to say pro-GMO, they came out being pro the data in the same way that they use data to acknowledge climate change exists. So the response has been amazing. And in terms of the controversy, I was also introduced to the term the vocal minority and the silent majority. And there is a very, very, very vocal minority that is anti-GMO, and you can track that to other anti-science issues like vaccines and other things like that. And it's really nice to see the silent majority, people that may have either been ignorant about the subject or sort of thought GMOs were bad, but they didn't have all the information, being really open to the fact that with good information, they are going to try and make better decisions. So the controversy was expected, specifically into some of the people who have been critical of the film, but it's also frustrating. It's oh, hello there, doggy. Right, there's one of our critics now. I'm guessing we'll probably get into the specifics of some of the critics, but it is definitely frustrating to have people that would never stand for some of the tactics of Donald Trump in his administration using terms like alternative facts or accusing something of being fake news and using that as a trump card, pun intended, to say the conversation is shut down. Fake news, you don't have to listen to him, it's over. And people using a term like propaganda around this film as a trump card. And there's several problems with that. One, the film is absolutely not propaganda, and I would be happy to put it in front of any historian of propaganda to put it to the test. But it's also a problem that many of the people that used that term hadn't even seen the film. And what would they do if that was reversed? They would be screaming to high heaven if Trump had accused something of being fake news and he hadn't even seen it. Or the other one I like to use is people saying, don't see the film. And if Donald Trump said, don't read the Paris Accord, I got it, I got you, I read it, and we're out, they would lose their minds. So treat us and this film with the same metrics that you want to treat Donald Trump.
Let's take up some of the specific questions that food evolution has raised. There are even some questions raised by supporters of biotechnology. Keith Clore, for instance, he's a respected journalist, writes in Slate, teaches at NYU. And he questioned whether the film will actually do any good, whether it will change minds of people, that this is more of an emotional issue and science facts don't change people's minds. Can science win over people whose views are value or emotion-based? Is this a vanity exercise, Scott?
You asked how the audience response has been, and I did not get to that. The audience response has been amazing. One of the things that we do at every screening, and we'll do it tonight, is that we ask before the screening, by show of hands, how many of you are concerned for your health or the safety of the planet in terms of GMOs? And then we see those hands. So at every screening, we have a number of hands in the air. In Seattle, we had 100% hands in the air saying that they were concerned about their safety. We thought, wow, that's going to be a very spicy Q&A. With the film played, we came back, we asked the question again as a follow-up, which we do at all these screenings. In Seattle, we had 0 hands back up in the air, or put another way, 100% conversion to the fact that they were not scared. I can say as a filmmaker, I've been incredibly honored that we are seeing the film change people's minds in real time.
The film does present the scientific data, but it does it in a narrative storytelling way. And we know just providing information alone is not sufficient when people have come to these decisions based on emotions or maybe their tribe. It does try to tell a narrative and it does connect emotionally while still remaining true to the data and the science. And I think that's really the gift that Scott brings to this discussion, is his ability to make this a compelling narrative. And that gets people in and makes them re-examine where are they actually getting their information from. And so to me, I've done a couple of screenings and people come up afterwards, and I'm not looking for them to change their minds or have a conversion, but I'm looking for them to say, that's really interesting, I'm going to go and investigate this further. And I think you can't have a better outcome as a teacher than to have your students say, wow, I'm really engaged now, I'm going to go research this information more.
Well, I can simply say that the film uses the right kind of information to change people's minds. People have made their decisions about this topic because the evidence has always been strictly science, and it's been about graphs and about numbers and about molecules. And now the discussion really has shifted to a discussion about people and how we help the people and the planet by using a technology that's safe. And that kind of emotionally touching, ethical type of persuasion is a much more compelling thing than what we've done in the past.
The movie sailed into a firestorm of criticism from some longtime GMO critics. We reached out to many of them, but they all declined to appear on this show. So let's voice their argument on their behalf. Let's begin with the claims of conflict of interest. The Institute of Food Technologists, which financed this movie, gets its support from big food corporations. They say you are all shills.
We are in the midst of attempting to do one or several live debates. We would be honored to have the conversation move from these accusations like shill and propaganda that attempt to shut down the conversation and move on and have a live conversation where you're saying, what is that term based on? What evidence do you have to support those horrible accusations? And it's very telling that they didn't want to come on and have a conversation. And that's sad. It's just sad, because what else are we doing here if we're not attempting to have a conversation using data and emotion? I have no problem with mixing emotion with data, but don't try and use emotion only.
I think the way that question was framed suggested that I in some way had any kind of creative control over the movie, and then that was not how it was made. Once Scott was commissioned to do the movie evolved, so to speak, and became the movie that Scott wanted to make. So I think that allegation of shill, if it's being aimed at me, I take that pretty personally, and I don't take any money from industry. Who funded it? Yes, you can look for conflicts of interest, but is there anything in the movie that's incorrect? Because to me, you've kind of lost the battle. If you can't find anything incorrect in the movie, and so you start attacking the people that made the movie or appeared in the movie, then you're a bit desperate. So a good debater always debates the topic. They don't attack the person they're debating. Once you start doing that, it's kind of a sign that you've lost the argument.
Yeah, if I can chime in, thank you for reminding me of that, Alison, because I did not answer that question about IFT fully and being called a shill. Very, very important that perceived conflict of interest is different than conflict of interest. You could draw a line between some of the members of IFT, what is oversimplistically called big food. That's absolute, and we can have that conversation. But I said from moment one with IFT that we can stop talking to each other if I'm not going to have complete creative control and final cut. And they got that. They got that completely. They didn't just give it to me. They understood that as scientists, they had to do that, or they weren't going to have a documentary. They weren't going to have a quality piece of journalism. They were going to have an industrial film. No one on our team was ever asked to promise results, and we never did promise results. We let the data and good journalism lead us.
It has been reported recently that global health food sales this year are projected to hit $1 trillion. Given the fact that the anti-GMO movement has been funded by Whole Foods, Eden Foods, Nature's Path, and a slew of other organic and health food corporations to the tune of multi-millions, does this suggest that the GMO controversy really breaks down to a proxy war between powerful competing corporate interests?
You know, this is not this black-white discussion. I don't like the way this is getting drawn up as a war. I use different breeding methods. This is one particular breeding method, and I think that we're trying to solve problems with this breeding method, and I don't think that I want to be painted as being in a war. That's not how agriculture works. Yes, there's some vocal minorities on the anti-side and there's some vocal pro-supporters, but I think most of the agricultural scientists working in this field are trying to use the best technology to address problems of agriculture and grow food for everyone. I don't like this casting of black and white.
I don't think we're casting it in that light. We're actually framing the questions on their behalf. They're trying to say, to the degree that we're funded by big organic, we have to respond back against the big pockets of big ag and big chemical. What we've seen over the past few years is an attempt to portray this as a war rather than as a potential conversation. So please understand that we're trying to frame this as the anti-GMOers have framed it. So perhaps respond in that sense. Has this been framed appropriately?
It is often set up as a polarizing debate, an either or, an us versus them. And we were excited and also very deliberate in finding people like Pam Ronald and Raoul Adamczyk at UC Davis, where Raoul is an organic farmer, Pam is a geneticist, and they are not just married but also work together. And the fact that they want to see as sustainable agriculture and food system as we can have. There's no such thing as a perfectly sustainable system, as we know. A reason that we found the organic farmer Emma Nalumia in Uganda, and the fact that she considers herself an organic farmer but also farms using other methods, but she's also a veterinarian and a scientist and uses science to help her make these decisions. So we agree on so many of the same things. We want the most safest, most nutritious, affordable, sustainable food for our families around the world. Now, how do we make decisions about that? And the good news is that organic farming is a method that has taught us some great things about being aware in food. The sad part is that some in the organic industry, in the health foods industry, have used fear around things like GMOs to further sell their products. And I just want to distinguish between those two things, as Alison said.
Let's get to some of the specific criticisms that have been raised about the film. Stacy Malkin, she's co-director of the U.S. Right to Know. Most of us know it's funded by the Organic Consumers Association, which is opposed to GMO crops. She's a critic of vaccines. She's a big supporter of homeopathy, alternative medicine. She says, reflecting others, that the film, quote, embraces only the science and scientists who side with the chemical industry players who profit from GMOs and the chemicals used on them. How do you respond to that?
I think that's wishful thinking on her part. I mean, every major scientific society in the world, most recently the National Academy of Sciences, have said that this particular breeding method is not associated with unique safety concerns. And so to suggest that this film cherry picks the scientists, I think literally they could have had any one of probably 10,000 other scientists in this movie that would have said the same thing. And so I just think that disregarding what the evidence actually says in this particular movie is reflective of what the actual data and science is around this particular breeding method.
And we also have antis in the film, from Vandana Shiva, Andrew Kimbrell, Zen Honeycutt, Food Babe, Jeffrey Smith, Charles Benbrook, Stephanie Seneff. So to say that they're not included in it is just incorrect. And again, going to using the same metrics that they would judge Donald Trump, I would love to do a debate where we have films playing next to each other. So I'll just choose 3. I'll go 4. Future of Food, Food Inc., going chronologically, Future of Food, Food Inc., GMO, OMG, and Seed. Have those 4 films play and be analyzed by scientists, food historians, experts in media and understanding propaganda, and put them against food evolution. And let's have a real discussion about what's good journalism, what isn't good journalism, what has scientific validity, and on and on. And I can tell you that all 4 of those films, not one of them has a single pro-GMO person in them. And they magically didn't find Alison or Pam or Dennis Gonzalez or Lena Tripathi working in Uganda. And as Alison said, the thousands and thousands of other scientists working on these methods. They only find Monsanto. And all 4 of those films end with the same call to action for you as a viewer to buy local, buy organic, and avoid GMOs. And that's not happenstance that all of those 4 films end that way. That was very, very deliberate, and it's been very successful for people that have been anti-GMO.
The film was not just criticized, of course, by fringe groups like USRTK. There was a group of 45 researchers and journalists, many of them based at the University of California, Berkeley, who issued a quite critical letter damning the film. Each one, by the way, was emailed with an invitation to appear on this show. They all declined. There are some big names who criticized the film. Food writers Michael Pollan, nutritionist Marion Nestle, for example. They both appear saying that GMOs are safe in your film, but in this letter, they said they were misrepresented, their sound bites were manipulated, and they too called this film propaganda. That must have stung a little bit, considering that there might be considered moderates in this debate.
It was very frustrating. We talked about it earlier in the show. The fact that most of them had not seen the film just tells me way too much right there. But let's stay specific with Michael and Marion, who are both in the film. Marion has a very short quote talking about the fact that she doesn't think that GMOs are dangerous. And Michael has a few moments also being very moderate and saying that he doesn't feel that GMOs are dangerous. He's always been careful about not fear-mongering, and he doesn't think the fear-mongering has helped. He confirms that from his people he's talked to that the Seralini study is not valid. He says that if we went backwards and GMOs didn't exist to 1996, that wasn't a heyday for agriculture. Put in another way, saying that are GMOs the horror, or do we just need to look at each situation case by case? So, are they using terms correctly? They are saying they were taken out of context. None of those are taken out of context. Out of context would be if I made them say things that they didn't say. So are they, and they're not responding to this. I keep asking them to say, are you saying that GMOs aren't safe? Are you saying that Seralini does have validity? What is it that's out of context? The thing that they are saying that they're uncomfortable with, and this goes back to having a conversation, is that the film didn't embrace all of their political points of view, all of their ideas around and concerns around GMO and agriculture and food. It goes way beyond GMO. And 2 problems with that. They're both journalists and they understand the process of deciding what is worthy of the story that they're telling, and be it a 1,000-word piece for the New York Times or a novel like Omnivore's Dilemma or a feature film like Food Inc. They understand how difficult the process is of what stays and what goes. The thing that we needed to reset the most was the conversation around safety. And that needed to be reset, and now we can talk about all these other pieces. And it's just sad because they had a chance, and they still have a chance, guys. If Marion and Michael, you're listening, please, please, please tell us what is incorrect in what you said, and not just try and say that it's wrong, because what you said is very, very important. It's very important to distinguish between what is real and what isn't real. And you saying that GMOs, case by case, are not dangerous, and things like the Seralini study do not have validity, incredibly important. And then let's go forward and talk about monocultures and weed resistance and anything else you want to talk about. Let's have that conversation. But don't use the trump card of saying that safety is still an issue, or that we're shills, or it's propaganda, or we're taken out of context. That's just cheap shots.
Malkin and others also claim the film largely sidesteps the elephant in the room, glyphosate, originally patented by Monsanto and sold as Roundup, which is paired with herbicide-resistant crops. They cite a World Health Organization group claiming it causes cancer. What about the farmers who are suing Monsanto, alleging they got cancer from applying it?
Genetic engineering is a breeding method, okay? And so bringing up the herbicide discussion around glyphosate is an associated thing, but it's got nothing to do with genetic engineering per se. So disease-resistant papaya does not involve the use of glyphosate or Roundup. Disease-resistant bananas don't do that. Insect-protected crops don't do that. We're talking about one specific application, and we're talking specifically here around Roundup-ready crops. And the film does actually address Roundup-ready crops. I'm not sure if Stacey's seen the movie, but it does talk about the relative toxicity of that, which of course is very low. And so I think that wanting that particular thing in this movie is really bringing up an issue that's associated with the use of basically herbicide-tolerant crops, which can be produced using conventional breeding as well. And so it's not uniquely a GMO issue. And if the movie was about glyphosate, it would be a different movie. Evidence from the risk assessment agencies throughout the world doesn't suggest that there's human health concerns associated with that particular herbicide. Actually, what food evolution tries to do is disassociate some of these different issues from this breeding method and how it can be used to address real problems such as disease resistance in plants and to separate it away from these confounding factors.
What do we say to families who say that they're suing that they got cancer because of glyphosate or they got cancer from Monsanto products? Let's be very, very clear. If somebody is going to show me evidence that a product from Monsanto or Whole Foods, Organic Valley, whatever, is directly related to somebody getting cancer, as a journalist, I would be proud to out that. And as a father, I would be very, very wary of moving toward that product. So let's be very clear that I want to have empathy for people that are in a difficult situation, but I want to have evidence to support that. So the IARC study is one that's frustrated me for a long time, because they only determine if they have enough evidence to say that something possibly is a carcinogen, not the amount it would take for that to be dangerous. So the difference between saying glyphosate is a probable carcinogen and saying the amount of glyphosate that me, Scott, and my children are going to come in contact with to be scared of it, they're not determining that, which is very frustrating. And if you look at the list of things that they have as probable carcinogens, it's salt and smoked meat, sunlight, beer. It goes on and on and on. They talk about cherry picking. I mean, that's extreme cherry picking to say that this study absolutely says that. And as somebody who lives in California, both Alison and I live in California, and I have great respect for our state in terms of some of the decisions that we make on safety and climate. It's a shame that the glyphosate has gotten to the point of being as scary as some have used it. I hope we can get back to the real data on that.
Glyphosate is non-toxic in the first place, correct?
It's got a very low level of toxicity, lower even than salt. And that point is very clearly made in the movie.
Let's actually switch almost as a final discussion point to what maybe is the central issue here. At the heart of the critics' belief system is the contention that genetic engineering encourages this complex, industrialized agri-food system. It severely damages the environment. It overuses chemicals, relies on monoculture cropping, hampers development of agriculture in the developing world. Simply said, are they right? Does the film adequately engage these issues? And is there another film to be made here?
There's always many, many more films to be made, thankfully. Yeah, I mean, you did a heck of a job of listing their laundry list, or as Alison says in the film, the whack-a-mole of this, that new issues keep popping up. So we have to peel back each one of those. If there's one thing somebody could walk away with from the film, it would be, how do you make decisions? Use the scientific method. What studies have been done on them? What studies have been repeated? Who's writing about them? Can I trust the source? It is difficult to do these things, But if we don't have that discipline, that's just not a bus that I want to get on. It's much more complicated than a meme of a tomato with a syringe in it.
Well, I think that the points they make there are really sad because genetic engineering and modern plant breeding techniques as a whole can address every one of those questions. That you can increase biodiversity on the farm. You can decrease pesticide inputs. There's so many good things that can be done, but the problem has been because of this insane regulatory environment, because of the pushback and because of the misinformation, the best technologies are never making it out. And the only ones that do it from the big companies. Our laboratories, our universities, our government labs are literally filled with solutions for people problems or planet problems, but we can't deploy them because of these types of criticisms.
I guess I'll just finish up with saying that the movie focuses particularly on the disease-resistant papaya in Hawaii and the disease-resistant banana in Uganda. And both of those were public sector developed genetic engineering solutions to disease problems that wasn't distributed to the farmers in the case of Hawaii, and it could be in the case of Uganda, to enhance the production systems of those subsistence farmers. And so I think to say that GMOs equals monoculture is too simplistic. Other examples, to Kevin's point, that have been developed, I think University of Florida has strawberry that wouldn't need fungicides that can't get to market because of this debate around this breeding method. And I think there are many examples where it could very nicely integrate, even with agroecological systems or organic farming systems, where all you're doing is providing that breeding method to the seeds to make them disease resistant, for example. Why would you not want to use disease resistant plants?
This has been a rancorous debate and seems not to be softening in the public sector right now. How has this affected the kind of research that you can do, the commitments that you have to bringing new breeding techniques to commercialization?
Well, I guess I can speak on that. In the state of Florida, where I'm located, many of our solutions that we can deploy could be based upon genetic engineering, ending a citrus crisis, where transgenes or added genes from plants to citrus trees have shown some efficacy in reducing this devastating disease. As Alison mentioned, strawberries that don't require fungicide, which would be tremendously wonderful for the environment and cheaper for the farmers. Other solutions can likely never be deployed. We may get very lucky as things go forward, as gene editing techniques seem to be less invasive, but it's one of the big frustrations. I work with such wonderful people who are looking out for the better interests of society and looking out for the greater good, and their hands are tied because of the regulatory climate.
I'm an animal breeder, and I've actually just been at an international conference in Ireland the last few days, and there's all sorts of solutions to problems like disease resistance in animals, and effectively this technology has not been on the table for animal breeders. And there's a lot of pent-up frustration because in some cases it is the best approach to utilise to bring in useful genetic variation into animal breeding programs. And so, yeah, sure, we can not use it and then we won't be able to bring in those traits like disease resistance, but the opportunity cost of that is tremendous. For my career anyway, this debate has pretty much stopped the use of this technology in my research program. So I've been able to move to other breeding methods where we don't have this discourse, but it basically is less efficient at addressing some particular traits. And so you basically slow down the rate of progress. And a little understood or appreciated fact is the incredible impact that plant and animal breeding programs have on the sustainability of agricultural production systems. And if not for the genetic improvement in our plants and animals, the environmental footprint of agriculture would be dramatically bigger than it is now. And so any time that you tie public sector science and breeders' hands behind their back, the opportunity cost of the foregone innovation is very real. I think a lot of people would have a shared value in trying to minimise our environmental footprint in our food production and would not perhaps appreciate that this debate is actually contrary to their stated interest in trying to reduce our environmental footprint of food production.
Thank you all. It's been a fascinating discussion. You know, the group of 45 scientists in their blistering denunciation of food evolution stated they hope to foster more critical discussion about the intersection of technology, agriculture, and social change. Let's hope they're sincere in that, because we couldn't agree anymore.
We want to thank Scott Hamilton Kennedy, Alison van Eenennaam, and Kevin Folta for being on our show and talking about this important movie. Food Evolution is in theaters around the country and around the world. We highly recommend this entertaining and informative movie. For those of our listeners who want to learn more about GMOs, we highly recommend Jon Entine's Genetic Literacy Project website and Kevin Folta's excellent Talking Biotech podcast. If you like what you heard today, you can subscribe to both Dr. Folta's podcast and the Eco-Modernist podcast on iTunes. Our ongoing work is dependent on the support of people like you. Any and all donations would be greatly appreciated. And now, for our final thoughts. It is only through back and forth exchange that people will be really able to evaluate and decide where they stand on the issues presented today. Both ourselves and our opponents owe it to the public to actually have that critical conversation. We are more than happy to have the Eco-Modernist podcast be a vehicle for a real, open, and honest discussion and debate on the issues. We will be once again contacting Ms. Malkin and all the 45 signers, appealing for a real constructive engagement. We promise to treat you with the utmost respect. Let us move forward to lower the heat and hold up a light on the issue of GMOs. And that's it for our show today.
This is Jon Entine.
And this is Rick Maltese. We'll be signing off till next time.